It is great to see you all. Ken Politz, I see you. And John Fernie and Robin Owen and Jenny Wolf Smith is here. I see you, Julie. What's behind you? It looks like Sesame Street. We've got you muted. I'm sorry. Oh, I see Pastor Voyer and Bill and Christine and Mary. Good to see you all.
Oh, and Caroline, if you could help watch, like, and unmute Mike and Bishop and Jeannie if needed, that would be awesome.
I don't have a chat option. Is that something when we were securing?
Really? That is a good point. I don't see it either. I wonder if I yeah, I might have forgotten to include it, and now I can't see where I can change it.
Okay. We can do by email and then.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. Yeah, it looks like I can't add that feature now.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
What do you think, Jacob and Caroline? We ready to begin?
I think so.
I think so.
All right.
Oh, here, let me switch over to Caroline.
Oh. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our weekly Zoom meeting. We've got some very good information for you today. Today we will be taking questions through our info box, so if you can email any and all questions to info@nwos-elca.org, we will make sure that either during our time together or afterwards, we will answer those questions. And then if we happen to have some that we aren't able to answer right now, we will email them out to you afterwards. We'll also be emailing out. We will have some resources today, so you will get those later this afternoon. You all should have received an email or seen through the Roster Administrators Facebook group that we sent out resources for April 19 worship. The Synod staff has put together a worship service, a service of word for you all to use. And we hope that that will allow you to take a time of Sabbath, you and your parish leaders. You've been working very hard, so we hope that this is something that will provide a bit of rest. The service will be available through YouTube. We have it uploaded to our channel already, so it's already live. We have a version that is audio only that was included in the email. So if you need to send that to a radio station or you would like to send that out, we have that available. We have a text of the service as well as Bishop's sermon. So if that's something you would like to mail out or email out, we do have a text only. And if for any reason YouTube doesn't work, I did include in the email a link for a Google Drive. You should be able to access a folder that has both the audio and the video that you can download there and then upload it to Facebook or wherever you would like. So if you need any other format, let us know. And if you did not receive the email for whatever reason, please email me and I will make sure that you get added to our list and that you also receive that email. So we hope that this is something that is useful for you, that you can use. And we have tried to accommodate as many variations of worship that you let us know about, but if there's any others, we will do our best to accommodate those as well. So if you have just joined, if you have any questions, please send them to the info box today and we will get those out. And now I'll turn it over to Bishop Daniel.
Oh, thank you, Caroline. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. I'm going to open with a reading from Psalm 116. I love the Lord because he has heard my voice and my supplications, because he inclined his ear to me. Therefore I will call on him as long as I live. The snares of death encompassed me. The pangs of Sheol laid hold on me. I suffered distress and anguish. Then I called on the name of the Lord. O Lord, I pray, save my life. Gracious is the Lord and righteous. Our God is merciful. The Lord protects the simple. When I was brought low, he saved me. Return, O my soul, to your rest, for the Lord has dealt bountifully with you. What shall I return to the Lord for all his bounty to me? I will lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of all his people. Our prayer for this afternoon is a prayer for generosity attributed to Saint Ignatius. Let us pray. Dear Lord, teach us to be generous. Teach us to serve you as you deserve, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for reward, save that of knowing that I do your will. Amen. I want to thank you for Zooming in for these next 45 minutes or so. I'm grateful. I'm always grateful for your presence. I pray you had a blessed Easter. We're going to spend about 30 or 35 minutes this afternoon in presentation mode around the topic of parish finances. We're also then at the end going to devote some time to respond to any questions that have come in by email through our info box. We do have a special guest with us this afternoon. Pastor Mike Ward is with us. Pastor Mike has served as a parish pastor, also a vice president of advancement. He is currently a partner with GSB Fundraising, doing full-time stewardship work for churches, camps, social ministry organizations, synods, and other church-affiliated institutions. He is a graduate of Trinity Lutheran Seminary, class of 1997, and he lives in Fletcher, North Carolina with his family. And he's also a beekeeper. And Mike is the author of this recently published book. It's called Abundance, Creating a Culture of Generosity. And you can pick up a copy at the Augsburg Fortress site, Barnes & Noble site, or at Amazon.com. So welcome, Mike. We're just delighted to have you with us this afternoon. I'd like to just a little review from our March 31st Zoom meeting. There I asked a key question, how do you lead from the middle of a crisis? How do you lead from the middle of a crisis? And there I shared 3 points. Number 1, begin with the end in mind. As I shared before, we are followers of a crucified and risen Jesus. We know how the story ends. The story ends with the exalted Jesus making all things new. Number 2, name the current reality. Always name the challenge that is before us. Confront the brutal facts of the situation while never losing faith that God will see us through. and that in the end we will prevail. This virus crisis, this will not last forever. We will see this come to an end. And finally, number 3, I've been talking about the importance of developing a plan, a crisis plan. Encourage you to work with your leaders and put together a written crisis plan that is both flexible, bold, and grounded in your mission and vision. When leading through a crisis, it's important for us to remain connected to our vision and mission of the parish you serve. In a crisis, mission and vision, these are life and death issues. When we fail to stay connected to a hope-filled future, we are tempted to give up and quit. Vision is who and what God is leading us to become. Mission is what God is calling us to do. And then the strategy is how we do it. So we want to stay committed to the vision and the mission, but we can be flexible with the strategy. During this crisis, we may be tempted to avoid talking about our God-given vision and mission, but that's a huge mistake. In a crisis, people need to be reminded of where God is leading us and what we're fighting for. And this is a fight. We are in a war against this virus, and clearly articulating the mission and vision again and again and again keeps us focused on what we are called to do and who we are called to become. Mission and vision are antidotes to fear. Fear is contagious, but so is hope. And mission and vision create hope, and we can never lose hope. So that was from last time we were together for a Zoom conversation. Begin with the end in mind, always name the current reality, and develop a crisis plan. So now I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about church finances. And I've got 4 points for you to write down. If you would write down on a piece of paper the letter B, the letter A, the letter C, and finally the letter E. B-A-C-E. Number 1, believe. Believe in God's abundance. Number 2, assess. Assess the current financial reality. Number 3, connect. Connect to your financial folks. And number 4, encourage. Encourage generosity. Believe, assess, connect, encourage. B-A-C-E. And I'm saying that's base, and it's a soft C. My good thesaurus is down at the office, so we're just going to go with it. Number 1, believe in God's abundance. Believe in God's abundance. Our God is an abundant God, but all too often I think our focus is driven by another narrative, the narrative of scarcity, the belief that there is simply not enough. Michael Hyatt, I like to listen to his podcast. He calls these limiting beliefs. And limiting beliefs have a way of keeping us down. And I know because I'm a recovering limiting believer. It's that old Eeyore mentality. You remember Eeyore? What's the use? It won't work anyway. Why even bother? How are we gonna pay the bills? Limiting beliefs are rarely true, even when they seem certain. And when they rent space in our heads, and they will if we allow them to, we need to step back, to reframe, and to revise them. We need to transform our limiting beliefs into liberating truths. Lest we forget, we are not a bunch of Eeyores. We are a bunch of Eastors. We are an Eastery people. We believe in a crucified Lord who actually rises from the dead. That's our liberating truth. And here are a few more for good measure. God has given us everything we need to fulfill our God-given mission. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We are all in this together, and we have got what it takes to lead God's people through this. Everything we've experienced in our lives has prepared us for this moment, and we've got all the resources we need to do the work of God. Those are liberating truths. And as I recall, that's the stuff that Pooh Bears are made of. I mean, we may feel like we're surrounded by a swarming beehive, but I just know that there's some honey in there somewhere. So believe in the liberating truth of God's goodness and in God's abundance. We have everything we need to do the work of God. Number 2, the letter A, assess. Assess your current financial reality. Assess your current financial reality. Okay, it's confession time. How many of you have said to yourself or to someone in your parish, our offerings are really going to take a hit? Our finances are going to tank. We may not even make it through this. Now, how many of us have said this without even knowing the truth of the current financial reality? We don't know the cold, hard facts, but we're going to assume when we should assess. I would encourage you to take the time to assess your current financial reality. What is the current state of the general fund? What's the current status of weekly offerings and tithes? What's the current status of our expenses? And what's the gap between the inflow and the outflow, if there is one? Is there revenue coming in for a special project that the parish could put on hold? Do you have any cash reserves? Do you have any emergency or rainy day savings? Dear friends in Christ, our president has declared a state of emergency in all 50 states. And I don't know if you've looked outside, but it's pouring. This is what cash reserves and rainy day funds are for. Please take the time this week to assess, to do a financial reality audit, to do the homework necessary to answer the question, what is our current financial reality? For which of you intending to build a tower does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Number 3, connect. Connect to your financial folks. Connect to your financial folks. This is not the time for us to go radio silent. Since we are physically distancing and unable to be in close proximity with one another, clear and consistent communication is essential. And my hope is that pastors, deacons, and lay leaders are in regular and intentional prayer and conversation. There are so many ways to communicate, and there are so many ways to miscommunicate and not communicate. It's important for us to stay connected. And when we're in the middle of a crisis, it's important, I think, to have a communication crisis plan. And while I encourage you to stay connected to your financial folks, those folks are not necessarily the ones who are standing before the congregation or the parish and leading the charge. or sharing the communications plan. That's the pastor and the deacon and the president. But you still need to stay connected to your financial folks. When I was a parish pastor, I would receive an email every Sunday evening from Shirley, our financial secretary. It was short and it was simple, but it helped me to see with great clarity a full picture of our parish finances. Every Monday morning, I knew exactly where we were that week, that month, and year to date. And that information helped me to communicate our financial reality to God's people. And over time, it helped me to see the trend line so that I could stand up on Sunday morning and celebrate generosity, or I could challenge us to be more mindful of our need to be generous. Which gets us to the fourth and final point. Number 4, encourage. Encourage generosity. Encourage generosity. It's okay to talk with the people of God about money. In fact, it's more than okay, it's necessary. As leaders, it's important for us, necessary for us to encourage generosity. In a discouraging time, people need an encouraging word. In my first parish, I had a guy who won $50,000, and he shared that with everybody in town. Every afternoon, he was at the Old Holland Inn sipping a beer. So one afternoon, I joined him. I heard you won some money. I would encourage you to give 10% to the church. Are you kidding? He asked. Do I look like I'm kidding? And then I tried to find out what made this guy tick. I mean, what were his passions besides beer? That's when he told me about going to church camp when he was a kid. So I shared with him my dream to get catechism camp started in the parish. I painted a picture of what it would look like and what it would do for our young people. But he didn't end up giving the church $5,000. He gave the church $10,000. 5 for the church and 5 for catechism camp. Money always follows mission and vision. So paint a picture for God's people of what it's going to look like and then ask. Because people are generous. And people want to give in a way that'll make a difference. So give them the opportunity to, by encouraging them to be generous. In a discouraging time, people need an encouraging word. Leading God's people to see that their generosity can make a real difference in a difficult time. That's an encouraging word. And that too is a liberating truth. B-A-C-E. Believe, assess, connect, encourage. This time I'm going to shift gears, and I'm going to invite our Synod Administrator, Jacob Henry, to talk with us about the CARES Act. Take it away, Jacob.
All righty. Good afternoon, everybody. So we've been getting some questions about the CARES Act, specifically the Payroll Protection Program. I'm sure some of you have, or many of you have probably heard about it, read about it a little bit. Maybe colleagues have been talking about it. So we're going to kind of do just a brief overview. I will preface this by saying I am not a financial advisor. I am not a certified public accountant, and I'm not a lawyer. So I'm not going to tell you to take it. I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I'm just going to kind of do broad strokes overview and point you to some other resources that have a little more in-depth information for you. So one moment while we pull this up. Alrighty, so the CARES Act does many, many different things. One of the provisions for economic relief that it provides is something called the Payroll Protection Program, the PPP for short. What that does, it provides a loan that's intended to cover 2.5 months worth of an organization's payroll costs. It has the potential to be a forgiven loan and essentially turn into a grant, but it is a loan. I think there's a kind of a big misconception. People think it's free money. It's not. It is a loan, and it's possible that it could be forgiven. It's intended, obviously, to retain and pay your staff. Congregations are eligible for it. You must, though, keep the staff employed for, I believe it's the remainder of this year. So if you end up terminating staff or decreasing wages, then it becomes a loan at 2-year term, 1% fixed interest rate. Payments can be deferred for 6 months. But obviously, it's intended to provide for payroll costs. So 75% of it you have to use for payroll costs. That can include health benefits. Right now, it's believed that housing allowance is considered part of salary, but it's not clear yet. That kind of almost has to be tested. One of the things the CARES Act did, it mandated that federal agencies had 15 days to come up with their supporting regulations for the CARES Act provisions. So that's why we're seeing there's just a lot of changing information going on, even in what the act covers, what it entails. And so there's kind of like a lot of rushed regulations and rules, interim rules that are changing. So that's why some of these things just remain unknown. And we don't know and won't know for a while. Another thing that's important to realize that the loan has to be spent within 8 weeks from the first disbursement. You cannot keep it as a cash reserve. It's intended to protect people's employment and provide compensation. So that's, and spur economic activity. That's why it has to be spent. So you can't kind of hang on to it as some sort of cash reserve. So some additional great in-depth information, I would point you to 2 resources. You want to check out ELCA Public Health website. That's got church-specific info. They've got recorded videos. You probably saw one by Tom Cunniff, ELCA General Counsel, came out. That was through Portico. They've got ELCA-specific facts and questions. The second resource I would point you to is actually by our audit firm that the Synod organization uses, Apple Growth Partners. So applegrowth.com/COVID-19. They've got excellent resources. They've got recorded webinars. They've got all the fact sheets, the SBA FAQ sheets. What they've also done, they do an excellent job at staying up to date on the latest rule changes and guidance from the federal agencies. So there you will see the evolving information, and it's very, very helpful, and it's much more in-depth. So let's see if I can get there we go. So the ultimate question, to take the loan or not take the loan. So some things you want to keep in mind and think through. The benefits obviously include financial stability for staff. It can provide relief for staff that you may have already had to lay off, like preschool teachers. It can also address issues of cash flow, but there are concerns that are commonly overlooked. The biggest of these is the potential for decreased giving. So if you think about it, the congregation's largest expense is probably payroll. So if you get a loan that covers 2.5 months of your largest expense, the potential is that your congregation falls into a false sense of security because they know that the largest expense is now covered for 2.5 months. And so why do they have to give, you know? So be mindful that you don't eliminate a reason for people to give. In addition, if your financial position gets worse and you are forced into a position where you might have to consider laying off staff, you then forfeit the loan forgiveness possibility, and you've essentially added debt to the congregation as an organization. So those are some concerns you might want to bear in mind when you kind of weigh this decision. There's also, broadly speaking, 3 important considerations. You first want to consider your donor base. You want to consider the cash flow situation of the congregation. And this third category, kind of this idea of economic justice. And we'll get to that in a sec. So let's start with our people. Are they financially hurting? So look at, for example, your top 10 donors. Are they operators of food service businesses? Are they barbers? Are they stylists? Or are they from sectors that have not been economically impacted? Now, how have these donors historically given? So did they always write a check and send it through an envelope in the offering plate? Is that why they haven't given yet? Maybe they just haven't made the adjustment to the online form, or they haven't mailed it in. So there are things you can do to make giving easier for those folks. Or did those people give electronically and suddenly it stopped? That also tells you something. That tells you they might be experiencing financial strain, or they might be fearful for the future. Those things you can kind of help use to extrapolate or project where the congregation as an organization might be headed cash flow wise.
Jacob,
Lastly,
one thing I'm hearing from you really is to begin with your people, and not necessarily to begin with the PPO cares, like to begin some conversation with your folks.
Yes, yes, of course. You want to start looking at where you're at now and where you might be headed. And that always starts with your people in the pews, or in this case, in home, in their on the couch. Lastly, you want to consider the cash position of the congregation. So do you have that rainy day fund like Bishop mentioned? And how much is actually cash? How liquid is it? Do you have, maybe you've got a money market, maybe you've got CDs. How many months worth of bills does that cash, does that cover? So cash flow, kind of digging a little deeper. So how much actual cash is in the bank? How much is your monthly payroll costs? How much are your usual expenses? And how does that stack up against the cash that you have? What's the status of the rainy day fund? If you have a lot of cash in a bank and your payroll costs are low in comparison, then maybe you don't need the loan. But if you've historically had cash flow issues even before this, or if you don't have cash and your payroll expenses are very high by comparison, then you might want to consider it. And if you do have a rainy day fund, which the congregation has said for years that we can't spend because we got to save it someday for the rainy day, well, as Bishop said, this is kind of the rainy day that we've been saving for. So if your answers so far have been pretty positive, you might want to ask yourself if you really need the money. So some things you might want to consider, this idea of economic justice. So have we even asked our donors to give? Have we told them that we have preschool teachers who are financially reliant on us and that they could use the donors' help? Have we even given our donors a chance to be generous? There's a congregation within our synod, they've got a preschool, and we're faced with this difficult situation. But they received an anonymous donation of $15,000 towards their preschool just to keep people paid. So the resources are out there. You know, we have to be, as that pastor said, we have to be bold enough to ask. And since we have resources available to us, if we take a PPP loan, are we then taking away an opportunity from someone else, like a small business who isn't as privileged as we are and doesn't have the resources that we have available to us? We should recognize that the funds for the PPP are limited, and we often don't realize that the church is so privileged. We have many advantages and many resources available to us that small businesses simply don't. We have donors with means, we have endowment funds, and there's other people who aren't as fortunate, and they should actively apply for the PPP. If we aren't in need, then we don't want to take away an opportunity from someone who is in need. So lastly, if you do decide to take the loan after you've met with your leadership and talked about it, you do need to have the approval of your congregational council. This is, you are applying for a loan. So it's not something that the pastor and the council president can just kind of on their own vocation decide to go out and apply for that. You really need to have your leadership on board. It's not clear whether or not the congregation needs to approve for this. Churchwide recommends that if you think you will be unable to comply with the forgiveness requirements of the loan, then you should have the congregational approval for it. And there are creative ways we can address that. So please reach out to me directly if you have to kind of go down that avenue. If you do take the loan, please be mindful of your messaging. Kind of keep it hopeful and future oriented. Talk about how the loan will allow your congregation to do other things. That will help guard against decreased giving. So for example, taking the loan eases pressure to meet basic expenses. So pointing your congregation and their offerings towards helping someone else helps keep that messaging positive. So some examples of that, maybe you partner with Jim Dumke at Jenna Cross and you buy hygiene products for residents of Luther Hills. Or you call Terry Rodriguez at Lutheran Ministries of Mercy and you send cleaning supplies to the filling home. Or you talk with Mike and Stan at Salem, or Lori and Cindy at Redeemer in Toledo, or Mary Beth and Jean at First and Bryan, and see what the needs are in places of poverty. So use this opportunity to reach out to places and people of need and be the church together. That can help inspire your donors to stay generous. So use your resources and your privilege to help those who are not as lucky as you are. And just as important, if you take the loan, stay busy. It only buys you 2.5 months. So don't take the loan and essentially do nothing, because you will end up finding yourself in a similar financial position as you are now, or might be now. So use the time to work on building generosity. Analyze your donor base, how they give, how often they give. Make giving easier for them. Talk with them about the importance of generosity. Show them that the church is being generous. This is where finding ways to help others is important. You can actively demonstrate how the church helps others and why financial support is so vital to this. And most importantly, share stories of generosity. How are people helping people? Tell them, share stories freely and widely, because generosity is inspiring, so share it freely. So that is kind of just the overarching overview of the payroll protection program. That slideshow we will have available along with the links to those other 2 resources. You can Google ELCA Public Health and Google Apple Growth Partners and look for that more in-depth information, and talk with lenders too if you decide to go down that road. So that's all I have related to that. If you do have questions, please email me directly. That's jacob.henry@nwos-elca.org, or you can email through the info box, or feel free to give me a call, and I'm happy to talk with you.
Thank you, Jacob, for walking us through that and for making the PowerPoint available to us to share in our parishes. This time I want to once again welcome Pastor Mike Ward from GSB Fundraising. We're pleased to have you with us, Mike, and welcome to the Northwestern Ohio Synod.
I appreciate it, Bishop. I appreciate the chance to be with you today. My colleague Jenny Wolf-Smith is on the Zoom as well with 106 people. I'll just invite you while I'm talking to thumb through all the pictures of people till you find her. She'll wave at you, I'm sure. So Jenny lives in Toledo. I'm glad she's with us. I've appreciated the conversation thus far. The Bishop reminding us to remember our mission and vision. I mean, ultimately it is to mission and vision that people want to give and to make a difference. And to remember who we are and where we're going, even you know, in times like this, is critical for our donors to know and to be grounded in that. And so that's great. And Jacob, I appreciate the overview of the PPP and just the, you know, caution that the first generosity story that our people hear should not be that of the federal government giving us a forgivable loan. That should be one story among many. And that is probably the telling of generosity stories and the searching for generosity stories and the discovering ways to make them happen is probably one of the greatest things we can do during this time, not only because it's good for our ministry, but I think it's also good for our own soul. To surround ourselves in people's generosity and abundance at times like this, when the world would make us to believe that there is only scarcity out there. A couple of just really quick stories. All have happened within the last couple of weeks. A pastor was phoned by someone in his congregation who is technically homebound, simply cannot be in crowds of people even when there's not a virus out there like this. Called the pastor and said, meet me in the parking lot in 15 minutes. I have something for you. Met the pastor in the parking lot, and he handed the pastor a check for $4,000. And he said, you know what? I should have given you this last year, but I was worried about tomorrow. As I look at the world around us, I recognize that I have plenty and I need to share. And so please use this $4,000 to make an impact and a difference for people who are hurting in these days. That's story number one. Last Thursday, my congregation got one of the $500 grants from ELCA World Hunger. At 10:02 in the morning, the email was distributed to the congregation that we needed over the next few weeks to provide $750 in matching money to get the $500 from the ELCA World Hunger Grant. 43 minutes later, we had received $900 from our congregation. A day later, we were at, I think it was $2,700, and today we sit at $4,000 plus the grant, okay? There was plenty of desire to care. It was for our local food pantry that we co-sponsor with the Episcopal Church down the road. 43 minutes, we achieved the match. And then finally, one of my favorite stories from this whole thing, just because it's such a true statement, I had somebody say to me, you know what? I don't know what's going to happen in the midst of this. I don't know if my industry is going to make it. I don't know if my job is still going to be there. For the first time in a while, I can't see the future as much as I thought I could. But today I'm fine. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Jesus's words to heart. I think it's Matthew 6:34. And not worry about tomorrow. What I know is what I can do today. And so today I can double my giving for the month of April. I don't know what I can do in May, but in the month of April, I can double my giving. And so that's what I'm going to do. Folks, those stories are the stories that we need to share with our people. Our people need to hear stories of generosity around them, because if we don't share those stories, we'll never learn how to be generous ourselves. And a couple of those stories got to those fears that we have. And I believe it's fear that holds us back. It's the number one thing holding us back in our generosity in the world today. And if we can break through that fear, even at a time when fear is out there, we will be helping our folks with their spiritual health, and we'll be helping our ministries to not only survive during this time, but also to thrive. So we've got to tell those stories. Those are generosity stories. The other thing we need to do as we communicate is also tell impact stories. This is not the time for our communication to be poor. This is not the time. I don't know you well enough to be as colorful as I want to be. This is not the time for us to just tell people what we do. Telling people that, hey, we had virtual worship, though honestly is exciting for the church to have moved into a day where we can do virtual worship. The excitement isn't virtual worship. The excitement is the impact that has happened because of virtual worship. And I know that impact is happening. The very first week that a church in Summerville, South Carolina did virtual worship, the pastor got an email that said, "You don't know me. I've never been to your church. I woke up this morning looking for God, and I found your service online, and I found what I was looking for. Thank you, and I'll be back." Yesterday, Easter Sunday, a very similar story happened to a pastor friend of mine that went on very similar to what I just shared. Plus, can you give us some information on your youth program? We'd like to get our kids involved in a youth program again. So that's the impact. It's not that we got worship online, and I know that was hard, and I know it was working outside the box for so many of us. So I'm really not downplaying the what, but let's get to the why. Let's get to those impact stories that the ministry we're doing now is making a difference. For me, holy cow, it was the day that my organist sent out Hold an Evening Prayer recorded on the organ from our sanctuary. And I played it in the background, and about halfway through, I just had to pause and stop, and I realized just how busy I was, how worn out I was, and just how much I missed the rhythm of worship. I listened to it 3 times that day. The spiritual gift that my organist taking the time to record Hold an Evening Prayer for me was just huge. It's not that he did it, it's the difference it made for me and my spiritual refreshing that day. So we need to get about communicating that. You're going to get a link to my blog site. There's a video on communication. And it was, most of the content there, honestly, has been done in the last 3 weeks. And that communication video is communication in the times of the coronavirus. So if you want to take a look at that, I lift that up to you. We need to be careful too during this time that we don't accidentally communicate scarcity when that's not our reality or our intention. And that's why I love that Bishop shared a crisis communication plan during these times, is that the 2 people or 3 people, depending on your staff structure, your pastor, your deacon, and your council president are really the ones who should be messaging on behalf of the congregation right now. You know, we need to stay in contact with our financial folks. We need to know where we are. We need to know the reality and not hide the reality, but we don't need to accidentally scare people into a feeling of scarcity. We need to put the story with the message of our financial realities. And then we also need to discover, why is our financial reality what it is? We're going to do another call on Thursday at 11, and we're going to go much deeper into these principles. But you need to know where your top 10 donors are. You know, you could be behind on revenue right now because of a single donor. All right. Most of our congregations have, you know, usually it's just a small handful of donors that skew the numbers, right? And if one of them has missed, then our numbers are going to be off. Let's not tell the congregation they're behind, if in fact they're ahead. But one single donor is behind. It's in times like this, we need to segment more than we've ever segmented. We need to treat people like the people they are, and we need to look not just at the whole, but at the parts that make up the whole, and discover where we need to pay attention and how to do that. And I'm going to get into that a whole lot more on Thursday when we gather. There's just not really time to do that here in these times. One question that I keep getting, I got it twice today. Don't worry, one was a Methodist guy. You know, it's not all Lutherans giving me these questions, but said I'm thinking about putting out a letter to tell people to tithe the stimulus checks that are coming to them. And I said, what a horrible idea. It kind of caught him off guard. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, quit telling other people what to do, and model generosity for them. Create what I call a join me, or better yet, a join us culture around tithing a stimulus check. This Methodist pastors in the DC area, all those people are federal employees. None of them are going to get laid off in this time. There is tremendous reality that most of his members don't need this stimulus check. I said, let's get some people to say, you know what, it's a struggle for me to tithe during, you know, regular times, but I'm getting a windfall in the stimulus check. I'll tithe it, or I'll give it all away. Or, you know, why not create some stories of generosity instead of just sending a letter to everybody and saying, hey, you all ought to tithe your stimulus checks. I mean, nobody's going to, well, a couple of people will do that because they're just created better than me, but they'll do better if if it's an invitation, if somebody gives me a story that says, hey, this is my struggle, but here's how I'm going to live more generously right now. Or how about somebody who is struggling, who says, you know what, I have loved going out to eat in my lifetime, and I would love to get takeout from the restaurant down the street so that those people can have a job. I'm going to use my stimulus check to go to the restaurant so that, yeah, I get a treat, but at the same time, I'm going to help my neighbors keep their jobs so that restaurant's still there and those people still have their livelihood. So what generosity story can we create in that can be shared? So it's not a, hey, you ought to do this, but it's a, hey, join me, or here's some really cool ways to be generous in times like this, that we can do this together. And here's a great time to also get to the point where we're not just talking about the survival of our own congregational ministry, but we're looking at how is the kingdom of God going to expand in these times beyond just let's not worry just about our survival. For most of us, survival's pretty well taken care of. We're still going to be here, unless we weren't going to be here before the pandemic hit. But let's look at this as a time to say, you know what, not only because I got one other thought on that. I don't want to live in a world after this where my congregation is the only nonprofit that survives. That would be a really terrible view of the kingdom of God, in my opinion, if that's all we had. But, you know, camps are struggling and social service agencies are struggling. And, you know, the Synod is walking with us, and World Hunger is doing really cool things. And, you know, why don't we catch a vision that's bigger than just the survival of our own congregations here, and point people to ways in which we can come out of this stronger, better, with a more vibrant church than we came into this. And that's what generosity and abundance can lead us to. Thursday at 11, we're going to dig much deeper into this. Jenny and I will present. We'll have far more time for questions and answers. We'll bring you samples of letters that we think model the right messaging at times like this. We'll talk to you how to drive offering, how to continue to have offering as part of your virtual worship. Certainly how to be stronger at the end of this than we were even coming into this. How to talk to donors, you know, how to segment and actually have a conversation with a donor who might need to cut their giving because it's the best thing for them right now, but they can grow in generosity even that time. So we'll get into all of that. We'll also talk to you about a couple of programs that one is a new one we've developed to walk with congregations this fall, and one's one that we've had out there for a number of years that is really about changing the culture in the congregation around the area of generosity. We've also got, it's kind of the beginning, the culture of generosity piece that'll be walking people through their fall stewardship drives this year. We'll kind of dig into what that is and what that will look like. The beginning, the culture of generosity piece, we think many congregations can get Thrive on Action Team money to participate. It'll be almost, I mean, that'll cover 2/3 of the cost or so. So, and then certainly we'll get you the link to our blog where we've got articles, fundraising in times like this, capital campaign. You know, if you were considering a capital campaign, what does that mean? All of those things we're beginning to address on our blog site. We're adding content all the time. There's some videos there that one council president called me after watching and said, I finally could sleep again tonight after the reassurance that you gave in that video presentation. So thank you very much for that. So I could go on, but I know we also have time constraints. And so I'll cut it there and look forward to seeing y'all Thursday at 11, and we'll get that link to you right after this session.
Great. Boy, thank you, Pastor Mike, for your wise words. And we will get that information out to you. Caroline will be sending that out by email, and that's this Thursday. I believe that's the 16th of April, and that will be at 11 o'clock. So thanks again, Pastor Ward. Caroline, anything you have? Any questions? Anything we want to share?
Actually, we only got one question to the info box, and if you do have questions, you can email them now. But it was a two-part question. One is was about assembly, and just so everybody knows, we will be sending out Synod Assembly information later this week, so be on the lookout for that. And the second was a recommendation for visitation of homebound members. What would the recommendation be for that?
Boy, I'm going to say that recommendation would be, I know a lot of our parishes and pastors are having a telephone conversation. So I would be very apprehensive entering into the home of folks who are, whose immune systems may be compromised or who are in that age group that are that could struggle with their health. So by all means, I think we need to be in contact. When I call people, I always pray with them, encourage them, read some scripture. So would encourage you to do that. I'm not sure at this time we want to be entering into homes of our shut-ins.
Okay. And that was all that we have for now.
All right, good.
Bishop, I've just kind of do a quick wrap up and reiterate for folks. So if you're interested in hearing more from Mike and Jeannie from GSB, they're a financial consultancy group that we at the Synod have started working with. A lot of other ELCA synods collaborate with them on stewardship resources. So if you're interested in hearing more from them, please join us this Thursday at 11 a.m. Mike and Jeannie will be hosting kind of a Zoom meeting that's just an open conversation on how to kind of get started with stewardship in this time and place, and do some kind of best practices, and he'll kind of build off of things he's shared here and kind of get a little more in depth than we were able to now. He'll also be able to point you to other resources that GSB will be able to offer for you all. So again, that's this Thursday at 11 a.m. The link will be going out probably later today once we wrap up here. And that'll also include some other resources that we talked about. So.
Thank you, Jacob. I'm going to close with just a couple of verses again from Psalm 116. That's a beautiful psalm. Would encourage you to take a look at that. Especially, I love verses 12, 13, and 14. What shall I return to the Lord for all his bounty to me? I will lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of all his people. And now may the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord look upon you with peace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Be with you, dear friends.
Amen.
Be with you.
Thanks, Bishop.
Bishop.
Mike Ward.
Caroline.
Now we're finishing up.
With you all.
Bye.
Great to see you all.
Thank you. God bless you.
God's blessings to you.
Easter joy to you.
Thank you.
Christ is risen.
I see you, Abby.
Oh, a doggy.
I see you, Abby Ketchum. Good to see you, Jared. And Paul, Todd, and Ralph.
Okay, we're out of there.
I see you, Laurie Shutt. Hello there. And Tom. Good to see you all.
Peace.
Pastor Doris, I see you. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Caroline. Sure appreciate all your faithful work. Bless you both.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.